Hello, please leave. Good evening, good morning, depending on which area of the world you are. Can you see me in the live stream? Please react on the chat if you can see me. I'm using a different software, so something may be wrong. Oh, very good, very good. So, thank you very much for being here tonight. This will be um, this will be a live stream a bit different than usual. It will be split in two parts. On the first part, we will do something, as I said, a bit different. We will be exploring the Russian military thinking. This is a journey that I started recently, and it will be something that will stay with the channel for a while, because I always thought that that us who live in the West, we are exposed to the American, basically, military thinking. We're exposed to the American doctrine, and we also use a terminology that we believe is the only possible one, but it is not. There are other debates in the world. There are different different ways of tackling this area of human knowledge. Unfortunately, I would say, but both Russians and Chinese are very prolific in this area. The debate is available and the documentation is available. So basically, I thought if everybody is covering what's happening in the United States, okay, I do something different. So let's cover Russia. And as I said, this is a journey that I just started, and it will stay with the channel for some time. And in a few weeks, there will probably be an announcement about this, but I'm not going to spoil everything. Let's say that there are going to be some news about the channel, but again, not now, not tonight. Tonight, we cover the Russian military thinking, and that will be the first part of the presentation. And then, as long as I manage to have a voice and I don't become too raucous, we can go on and just have a chat and discuss what's happening. We can have questions and we see what's going on. So, without further ado, let's start. Here we are. So, this is an introduction to Russian military thinking, and it is a short introduction. And let's see if they actually stuck to their thinking during the operations in Ukraine. I won't spoil the answer. Maybe it's a yes, maybe it's a no. As I said, at the end we will have a long section where we can talk and discuss and so on. I won't stop for this. I won't stop while I'm presenting. And please, if you are going to be so kind to use a super chat, please hold till the end, okay? Because I would rather go through the presentation relatively quickly, and then we can have a discussion. So, as I started working on this, I had a few surprises, to be honest. So, Russian military thought is very complex and very articulate, and it is not settled. We always, or we often at least, think to Russia as this sort of a monolithic country, a bit gray, where there's no sparkly debate. Something is missing. It's absolutely not like this. There is a very articulate and not settled, so that they don't agree with each other, debate which is happening out in the open. And the authors, you see them listed. Some of them, you see them listed on the right, and these are the only authors that have published something after the fall of the Soviet Union. So, but they're the relatively modern ones, but this is going to it could go back many years. And as I said, there are plenty of thinkers, not just these, that can publish. There are several magazines that can host publications of military theories. And so pretty much everyone who has anything relatively, with some that is at least modestly interesting to say, will probably find a way to publish this into the military complex and have its voice heard. Another element that we often think is that the Russians do sort of operate like the Soviets. There is not, it is not devoid of justification, this thinking, but is definitely not the case, in the sense that the debate and the theory and the doctrine has moved a very long way from the time of the Soviet Union. And as I said, it is a public debate. So if you are a massive nerd like me, you can follow it. Well, you need to know Russian, and I have to say that I started the very long journey of studying Russian because I think it's useful. I mean, it is interesting. It is a world that we don't really know and understand, and if you want to understand a country, you need to learn at least a little bit of the language. So what are the features that are of the Western debate against the Russian debate? Well, the Western debate is dominated by the US military thinking, and is normally in English language. It doesn't mean there isn't anything else, okay? There's plenty of there's plenty of material, plenty of authors in France, for example, or in Turkey, or in Germany, to a lesser extent in Italy as well. But the point, if it is not in English, it won't go out. The Russian world, Russia is obviously more homogeneous. They all speak Russian, and it is simple. And it is the Western debate is dominated by the United States think tanks and the United States military. The Russian debate is more the Russian debaters, the people involved in the debate are generally either military or academic authors. The Russians tend not to have this institution of the think tank. They have equivalents, but they exist, let's say, within the institutions. Okay, they're not separate. There are no separate units, separate companies, separate firms whose only job is to think and produce reports and produce analysis. The Western debate is very matter of fact. Normally think about what are the objectives, What is the situation? What are the means to achieve an objective? What is needed? What is not needed? What is superfluous? What is current? What is not current? And so on. So very matter of fact. The Russian debate, on the contrary, is extremely deep in a philosophical sense, is very sophisticated and very articulate. We will get back to this in a minute to try to explain how it is. The Western debate revolves around technology. Most of the time, the discussion has a technological element. The Russian debate has an extremely important political dimension, which is not what you think, in the sense that the political commissars don't exist anymore, or let's say thought police, or that is or the NKVD or the KGB that are actually guarding the political orthodoxy of the communism and socialism don't exist anymore. There's nothing like that. But the Russians kept thinking deeply in political terms. And here is the one difference, which is probably cultural, and it's something that I also found in my experience, in the sense that we Italians tend to be more like the Russians when it comes to this kind of analysis, okay? And so we tend to find the Anglo-Saxon, the Anglo-Saxon debate, the Anglo-Saxon approach, a bit too simplified, okay? Because the idea generally in the West is to, when you have a problem, you break it down into smaller problems, you fix one problem after another, and at the end, you will probably have a solution. The Russians do things differently. They have a holistic approach to the problems. So start from the general ideas, and from the general ideas, they generate strategic and tactical concepts. So one approach is sort of a bottom-up approach, the other is a top-down approach, okay? Which, in purely political terms, I may not agree with that, okay? One may say that it is the difference between democracy and autocracy. I'm not talking about this. These are just thinking and methodological structures, methodological approach. In a Western report, you will have a bullet list of points and a bullet list of comments about the points, and so on. In a Russian text will be long, narrative, there will be a general discourse, and it is up to the reader, up to the viewer, to follow and understand and extract which are the key concepts behind that. Which is very interesting. It's a very interesting cultural difference. As I said, I've been there up to a point, and yeah, it's interesting. So the main documents of the in Russia that refer to the Russian doctrine are the Military Encyclopedia of the Russian Federation, edition whatever. Every few years there is a new edition. This is edited by the military. It's not a private enterprise, and in theory should contain more or less everything. It's a sort of a handbook of the Russian military, and but again, it's public. It's something that you can buy and go and read. Then the Russian government issues 3 documents: the military doctrine of the Russian Federation, which is managed by the Ministry of Defense, The foreign policy, and this happens every few years as well, normally every 8-10 years, but could be less, could be more. The foreign policy concept, which is managed by the Foreign Affairs Ministry of the Foreign Affairs, and the National Security Strategy, which is a general strategic document that is done by the government as a whole. Okay, and again, the contribution to these documents is not just Putin. The contributions come from different places in the Russian government, in the Russian military, and they are all synthesized in these documents, which become the, let's say, the officially adopted version of the debate. And yeah, again, these are public documents. You can go and read them. And the Russians tend to write what they think. In the same way, we don't discuss similar documents that are actually published by the United States government or the European Union or by any other government. So these are official government documents. So what are the bases of the Russian military thought? Well, the starting point was this gentleman many years ago who said that war is simply the continuation of politics with other violent means. This is basically the Clausewitz definition that we all know and love. Yeah, okay, maybe not love, but okay. It's very well known, with the explicit reference to violence. And this has been, for pretty much the entire time of the Soviet Union, the key definition of war. So, violent activities, which translates into classical military activities, the use of the army, the navy, and the air force to exert violence and force the enemy to do what you want. Okay, that was the extent of the military thought during the Soviet Union. And obviously, they changed plenty of doctrines, a lot of things, but this was the central tenet. This was the focus. This obviously changed when the Soviet Union dissolved and the Russian Federation appeared. And the Russians, at this point, they're no longer Soviets, they're Russians, observed three events which sort of shaped their reflection, their way of thinking. The first was the Gulf War of 1991, in which they saw the effect of air power, basically, because the Russians were not surprised at all that the Iraqis, with Russian equipment, with Soviet equipment, but it was pretty much monkey models, so not the latest, and they were not as well trained as the Soviet army and so on. They were not surprised that they were crushed by the NATO ground forces. What they were surprised was the incredible effectiveness of the air campaign. That really shocked them, because they saw that their air defenses, at least in that situation, had been way less effective than they were thinking. The other element that they saw, the other event that shaped the Russian military thinking was the hostilities in Serbia in 1999, where they have seen air power at work again, but in this case they also have seen the fact that the West is willing to apply air power outside the mandate of the United Nations. Okay, so it was a political consideration. So they thought that the West was growing aggressive in using this tool of air power. Mind, I'm just relating what they think. Okay, then these are not my opinions. Okay, so they don't try to sort of present an opposing view to me. I'm just explaining you what they are thinking. Okay, this doesn't mean that you don't have to agree. Some stuff I don't agree as well. So this is just an explanation. This is you may consider this sort of a short university lesson. The third fact, the third element that was considered and heavily studied by the Russians were the colored revolutions that happened particularly in Eastern Europe, and chief among them, obviously, Euromaidan in Ukraine, which started a chain of events that you all know where we are now. So again, they saw that there were political activities, non-military activities that had been very, very effective at in reaching some political objectives. Okay, so they came up with this idea that war, in their definition, includes military and non-military means. This is not just a monolithic thing. I'm not making the story of the debate because that would take forever and probably wouldn't be really interesting. But this is something that is accepted in Russia. So basically, war is everything. War is what we normally consider war, so the use of military force, but also non-military, cyber, but also political, propaganda, subversion, and anything in between. Okay, this is their idea. Everything that you can do to reach a political objective outside of Russia, obviously, in foreign politics, a foreign political objectives can be considered a form of war because, well, that's what powers do, in the sense that the United States try to influence the behavior in the world scene of plenty of countries. So does China, so does India, to a lesser extent, so does Turkey, for example, and so does Russia. And all of this should be considered war, part of a single concept, part of a single effort. This is what I was saying when the Russians start from the general ideas. Okay, this is what they are thinking. This is what they do. They sort of expanded the definition of war to include everything. So let's see the military part first. The idea that they came up before Ukraine was this idea of non-contact warfare. They've seen the Western air power at work, and they came up with their version, okay, of their power. They know that they know that they don't have the resources of build the many thousands aircraft force that is available to the United States and the large West. So their declination was the development of long-range weapons. basic cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. And so you see the KH-101, you see the Iskander, you see this kind of things. The other element was the electronic warfare. The West came up with the multi-domain doctrine, which is land, sea, air, cyber, and space. The Russians consider electronic warfare, the electromagnetic spectrum, a portion of the battlefield. We would probably say it is everything non-kinetic that is concerned with the electromagnetic spectrum is included in this definition. And the third element, and the consequence of all this was the heavy investment in electronic warfare systems for the ground forces, where in Ukraine are doing a good job. They are very effective, but also in the for every branch of the armed forces. I mean, the development of electronic warfare for the aircraft is actually a fact, and they are heavily working on it. And the new Su-57, which was entirely designed after or while this shift was happening and was considered, is actually completely covered in AISA arrays just to operate in the realm of electronic warfare. The third element was the information warfare. And for the Russians, this is declined in two elements, what we would call the ISR, so the capability of acquiring information and collecting information and sharing information. We often hear that the Russians, the Russian army missed the computer revolution, the IT revolution. And up to a point, it's true in the sense they're less well equipped than Western forces, but they perceive this as a weakness. So they are working they're working to overcome this problem. They're working about this problem and do these things in this area. The other element is the concept of maskirovka, in the sense trying to provide information to the opponent that is end up causing the opponent to act in favor of the Russian forces rather than its own favor. It is sort of this. It is a sort of deception, or a sort of way of avoiding a clear perception by the opponent of the forces involved. These are the three concepts that you find time and time again in the literature: non-contact, with long-range electronic warfare and information. The non-military means are the information warfare, which is where the battlefield is basically the propaganda and the disinformation, which is, the famous Russian bots that try to influence the American elections. They did exist. It's very debatable if they did anything, to be honest, but they did exist, and they exist, and they definitely do exist. There is proof. Ryan Macbeth, which otherwise I don't suggest you to follow, but when it comes to the analysis of this kind of propaganda and disinformation from the Russian side, he is actually on point. then I think he's off in many other ways. But on that, he's really, really on point, and it is worth listening. The other element are the colored revolutions. These are part of war, actively part of war for Russia, which is basically subversion. Uh, and the KGB, by the way, were masters of this activity, but they sort of lost probably some edge on this side, but they were well aware that um, this is going to be one of the elements that the Russians may want to utilize. The interesting thing is that they believe that this kind of information warfare and color revolutions are so effective, or could be so effective, that they should be considered a form of violence and actually an alternative to military means. And again, this is part of this concept that war is everything. War is everything that is against someone, is in favor of your interest and against someone else's interest. So, under some aspect, it doesn't seem too much different from the Western ideas in the sense that we have air power, which is non contact. We have information warfare as well. The color revolution, we know that they have been, they're not the spontaneous uprising that many would like to believe. They had that component, obviously, but they have been also influenced by Western secret services or non-profit organizations or think tanks and so on. There is an entire network of these organizations that permeates the entire West, that is sort of trying to set the tone of the debate, of the political debate, the cultural debate, and so on. And which I don't blame anyone. I don't blame anyone for a second for doing so, because that's exactly what power do. Power seek influence. Powers try to do influence. It is eventually up to you to be capable of defending from this influence, but someone else will always try to influence you in order to make you do something in their favor. That's normal. That's part of, this is realpolitik, and it is part of the of the zeitgeist of international relations, where yeah, there are groups, there are blocks, and rivalries form and shift and so on. But this is a subject that will take us very far. There also say, I mean, so it seems that from a different perspective, from through going through a different to a different path, they came to similar conclusions. But there are two key differences. The first is that for the Russians, the border between war and peace is blurry. So, from their point of view, every action of a foreign actor, which is not neutral or is not in favor of Russia, could be potentially an act of war. Obviously, well below the level of armed confrontation, but we said war is everything, and this is so. And it's sometimes difficult to understand what is part of a war effort or if something that is just normal and completely peaceful. The second element that is different is that the Russian thinking is exclusively defensive. There is basically no place in Russian military thinking. It's not the case in the wider societal debate. There are other voices that don't say this. But in the military debate, in the military thinking, you never find stuff like we need to have an expeditionary force because we may need to intervene in that country. Of course, they have some measure of it. Okay. And of course, the Russians, from a strictly technical point of view of the military employment, do understand the offensive and probably understand it better than many. But the thinking is all for defending the Russian Federation. So it's not an offensive. It's not an offensive thinking. Okay, as I said, the Russians are less offensive than commonly thought, but less expansive than commonly thought. The fact that Putin wants to rebuild the Soviet Union is such a stupid thing, is not the case. But they do want to exert influence to other countries because this is what powers do. But in the military thinking, you never find anything like that. They never find, since one day we may need to invade Georgia. Well, they actually did this. Since one day we need to invade again the Turkmenistan, we need to have an expeditionary force. You will never find anything like that. So this is the difference between the Western and the Russian way of thinking. The blurry border between war and peace, and the fact that it is defensive in nature. I understand that this is difficult to visualize. It's difficult to wrap your head around, considering what has happened recently. But that's what you find. That's what you find in the text. So, what about Ukraine? In the sense that they have this articulate thinking, they had this debate, they came up with some interesting ideas. Did they apply them in Ukraine, an invasion of Ukraine? I hope it's clear enough.
I found this on the web.
And this was Siri. Anyway. So this is, they actually, in the case of Ukraine, they went against their own doctrine. So, color revolution, they suffered from a color revolution. Euromaidan, they didn't provoke one. They managed to get hold of Crimea, but that was through military means. They managed to get a hold of these two small republics, Luhansk and Donetsk, which are actually Russian speaking, but there was no countrywide revolution. They didn't manage to change the perception, the hearts and minds of the Ukrainians to become more friendly toward Russia and change their path between 2014 and now. Disinformation, did not happen as well, in the sense that there was no serious activity to sway the Ukrainian or the international public opinion about the Russian intent in Ukraine, in the sense that they have been quite open. The main thing that the Russians always said, we want Ukraine to be neutral and not be part of NATO. Give us that and everything else, and we will find a solution for everything else. And even recently, Putin said, we can sit down and have a negotiation on the basis of what was agreed in Istanbul at the beginning of the war, during the negotiation at the beginning of the war, that were afterwards rejected. And the key point is Ukraine's neutrality. Now they need more, obviously, because they need to justify 2 years and a half of fighting and losses and everything else. But that has always been the key point, and they always been very open about that. They never try to plot or do anything else to change the perception of the other countries. So again, they didn't apply their doctrine. Non-contact operations. Well, they yes, this they did. They did with the Air Force in the first week when the Ukrainian air defenses were not regrouped, so they could operate. They kept using cruise weapons, ballistic weapons, so long-range weapons in general, which turned out to be, with some ups and downs, but in general quite effective, quite accurate. But basically, they were not enough. They did not achieve a strategic result. They didn't push Ukraine out of the war, or they didn't undermine the capability of Ukraine to support and fight the war to the point that the Ukrainian ground forces would break and then move forward. So their variant was probably did not really work just up to a point, did not really work at the strategic level that was expected to work, worked at operational level, worked at tactical level, but not at strategic level. But this is probably a case of not enough, in the sense the Russians are, despite the fact that the Russian had a very large production, a very large number of these weapons available, and today they have spectacularly increased the production of these weapons, still not enough. And so this is the so this is the situation. So this could be a 50-50 if you want. And the other element exactly was the Russian Air Force. More recently, we have seen the Russian Air Force coming back to real operation and support operations, but again, they very, very rarely go beyond the line of contact. They couldn't really penetrate deep in Ukraine. And the problem here is mostly the fact that Russian suppression of air defenses work quite badly, not from a technical perspective, but from an operational point of view. And so they were, and it was an Air Force that wasn't so good in suppression of air defenses, which is, if you think, is obvious, because if the nature is defensive, that's definitely a mission which is not a priority. So there was an Air Force which wasn't particularly good at suppression of air defenses against some of the best air defenses, despite being quite old. So that was the result. So again, the Air Force in the non-contact operations is probably not sufficient, probably just below. I mean, not terrible, but just below, but below the sufficiency. Electronic warfare actually worked, and is working quite well. It actually has neutralized several of the Western so-called Wunderwaffen that were supposed to change the course of the war. This one is actually non-contact, and it's working. Obviously, someone you would always want better, but in this case, they have a clear superiority against Ukraine, and even in a larger conflict, it wouldn't be easy to deal with them. The ISR part is sort of work again, probably sufficient, because at tactical and operational level, it worked. The Russians very, very quickly understood the importance of drones. and like Ukrainians, okay, because it's a matter of survival. And they became very well organized from this point of view. Um, Problem is a strategic level. It is um, the electronic warfare aircraft that can fly nearby the front line or nearby the NATO border and see what's going on do exist, but they are few. The electronic intelligence aircraft do exist, but they are few, not enough. And even the space component do exist, is sufficient to manage a situation like the one in Ukraine, but you can't really say it is that it is a really a factor, a war-changing factor in this war. If you want an example, it would be probably extremely useful for the Russian being in the position of being capable of targeting the convoys and the trains that go back and forth from Poland. I've seen very, very little from this point of view, but this is the element. So, could it have worked? Well, I still think that the Russian are depicted worse than they really are, or at least worse than they really were, because now the army and the Russian air forces are different from the ones that started this war. I still think they could have pulled this off if they did not screw up so much at the beginning. Because, well, coming to the non-military means, there was no effective support for pro-Russian elements in Ukraine. They actually tried to start a conspiracy to force a government change, but yes, the Western secret services sort of realized that it was happening, and in the end of the day, it didn't work. There has been no international campaign toward the public opinions. Have you seen any mainstream outlet, say, trying to present the Russian point of view? None. Never. Pretty much never happens. There are some non-mainstream media that try to do this, but normally doesn't happen. They are very active diplomatically behind the scenes, but from this point of view, they don't. They made a gigantic mistake about the non-Russian speaking Ukrainian population, expecting that they were going to receive the Russians with, they use the expression, with bread and salt. So with open arms, throwing flowers to the Russians coming into the country. And this is an information failure. This was an information failure. Whoever would plan this was, this operation was planned mostly as a peaceful occupation, and it was not planned by the military. It was planned at political level, okay? And they made this enormous mistake about the attitude of the Ukrainians that turned out to be lethal, completely jeopardized the entire operations. The soldiers were told to expect no resistance or very little resistance. The air defenses were told that everything that is flying is Russians, so you won't even need to turn on to turn on your radar, because there will be no air threat. And on a number of They didn't even have enough fuel to reach their targets because they were planning to actually capture the Ukrainian depot and use those to keep moving. Um, they didn't expect any reaction from or just minimal reaction from the Ukrainian military, and it was actually the exact opposite. Terrible mistake. There was no unified command and planning. The districts of the military district, each one sort of extracted a hodgepodge of different forces from their units, and each one was given a sector, and each one had its own plan, which is terribly idiotic. And the Air Force went on without coordination with the ground forces to do their own stuff. That's stupid. And the thing is that the Russians invented combined arms. So it's not that they don't know, it was just stupid. It was just stupid. It was whoever was in charge was completely and utterly incompetent. If this was planned as the beginning from a full-fledged military invasions, I think they could have pulled off. But yeah, this wasn't the case. So they lost. At that point, probably still not many men, expert men, but they lost an enormous amount of modern weapons. And the best part of the Russian army, when destroyed in those few weeks, those few months, and after that, everything was different. So, yeah, obviously, if you're pro-Ukrainian, you say, luckily. If you're pro-Russian, say that was criminal. I'm just presenting you with the fact. And this is something that I thought a lot about, and it was very difficult to explain at the beginning, but now I sort of came to understand what the problem was, and I'm presenting this to you. And I would end with this, that the price of poor judgment and sloppiness is under everyone's ears since February 2022. Thank you very much. This concludes the presentation. So I hope it was actually interesting. There are, wow, 300 people watching me talking about these very abstract things. I don't know how really to say thank you and be grateful. I'm very, very grateful for having so many people. So question, debates, comments, I'm taking them from now. I've seen that there was a lot going on in the chat, so I'm perfectly, but I mean, if you have questions, just put them now. Spaghetti. Okay, this reminds me that I didn't eat. I will eat it. Is there not a way for stem cells or gene therapy, something to treat your heart? Thank you very much for worrying. Thank you, first of all. I sort of feel I'm sort of feeling better. It's a long story, but thank you very much for thinking. I have the help that I need, and I'm getting organized to get even more, so that's fine. So, can Russia pull this off eventually, or the war is lost for good for the Russians? Okay, if you ask my honest opinion, if as the things are now, probably Russia has an advantage. It would take us very far to explain why, but I still think that Russia is going to pull it off, not the West. it it will end in a way that is sort of a stable situation, will come slowly to a halt. Okay, and at that point, probably the Russians will be ahead. They will be better off than the beginning, even though the cost will be enormous. But I still think that the Russians will manage to pull it off rather than the West. Sorry. This moves very quickly in the chat. How are newer Russian aircraft, Su-57 and so on, going to affect the course of war? Will there be a military solution? Or will it come down to election and political changes to the end of the conflict? So, as I was saying, so forget there's going to be a change of government in Russia. Forget it. And if there is a change of government in Russia, maybe either someone more radical than Putin, who is going to invest even more in the war, or the Communist Party of the Russian Federation. So if there was a change of government, it's going to be either something worse than Putin, or the communists. So thank you, Daniel. Why believe this war is what it is when Russian natural gas flow through Ukraine is at record high and US stock dollars pay for it? Well, there is obviously, it's not a secret in the sense that in every war, in every situation, you have you have a compounding situation where there are different factors. This is one of those. Okay, the commodity market is one of those. So I found interesting that the pipelines were not destroyed. The pipelines to Ukraine were not destroyed, and they're still available. So this is one of the components. So, but it's not the key element. The key element is the fact that NATO expanded to the east, and the Russians perceive that as a danger. Russia might defeat Ukraine, but will she get the US out of her backyard? To what extent might victory be Pyrrhic? Yes, it will be Pyrrhic. It won't be a clear victory. I don't see a long-term path to exactly pushing the United States out of Europe. I think the United States will have problems. They have passed their apogee, but it will take decades, if not a century. Russia cannot win. They are running full steam already, and Ukraine went 8 months with nothing from USA, and Russia took a few little towns the whole time. They are not running full steam. And they have plenty of room available, more room that is normally believed. I have the luck of having friends who do this kind of analysis and pointed me toward elements that made me think like this, that the Russian is doing better than in many of the reports that are shown in the West. Not well, definitely not well. They have their problems, absolutely. but but their autonomy and their endurance and their capabilities are not yet full steam. And Ukraine will, it is debatable that the support of Ukraine will vanish, not just the election of Donald Trump. It is the fact there is a lot of tiredness in Europe and the United States about supporting Ukraine, and and behind the scenes, a negotiated solution is being pushed. This is interesting. How do you think recent EU elections will affect this war? Seems Le Pen and AfD, uh, kind of, very kind, got a lot of seats. I think that is going in the direction I was mentioning before. People are tired of this war. They would like to end, even though this means that Ukraine will need to accept a compromise. You will not find this into the newspapers, obviously. In the mainstream media, no, you won't find this, but that's the feeling, and this can only help. I don't think it will be decisive in any way, but yeah, it's one element more, one straw on the camel back, one additional straw on the camel back. How long do you think Russia will take to rebuild their military after the war? That is mostly a political decision. The stimulus that is derived from the war is doing marvels for the Russian economy, which is actually growing. Obviously, you can sustain a full war economy. They're not there yet, but they cannot sustain this kind of effort indeterminately, even in peacetime. But in theory, could be very quick. Could be very quick after the war. And one thing that I can say is that some of these friends who actually study these things all noticed that most of the Russian economic programs are all long term, many years, which means that they A, believe that the war is going to last quite a long time, B, they are getting ready to rebuild their forces very quickly. Will they be capable of doing that? Who knows? We need a crystal ball for that. But that's surely their intention. It's not about Russia, it's about Putin staying in power long enough to die of old age. And the elite of his gang have some way of retiring or getting their money out. Yes, there is this element, of course, but you could say that the same exists in every government. Tell you a short story. A few years ago, I voted for a political party in Italy that had a program. And one of the things that they said in that program is, we will never ally with those other guys. Then they realized that at some point in a complex political situation in which the government was unstable and so on, basically they realized that if they asked for a snap election at that moment, they would not have had the parliamentary pension. The parliament, and expelling a few people that didn't agree, most of the MPs of that party that they voted for made a 180 degrees flip flop and created a coalition with that other party. So it happens everywhere. Okay. It's not relevant. Okay. Question: can we expect to see a Western intervention if Russia starts to rapidly gain ground in case of a collapse of Ukrainian lines? The answer is, unfortunately, yes. So, by the way, the only way Ukraine could pull this off was if Western forces, American and NATO forces, went got boots on the ground, okay, and started operating with Ukrainians in Ukraine. It is debatable if the NATO European allies are in the position of really doing that, but that's the only thing that could save Ukrainians, and Ukrainians will try everything for this to happen. Some of the Eastern European countries, basically Poland and the Baltics, will probably at some point, if Ukraine collapses or there is a risk, or if Ukraine is risking collapse, will, as a sort of, not as a member of NATO, but privately, as if there was a difference for the Russians, will probably send troops in. And that's very, very dangerous, because that's where you start having the risk of nuclear escalation. And God save us all if that happens. West has lost all trust. Everything they promised or said in the beginning was eventually broken, so I don't think Russians take Western speakers seriously. This is interesting, because something that I actually realized trying to study the Russian society is that there is probably a 20%, the younger part of the society, which is pro-Western, which believes that Russia should stop all of this, integrate with the West, and become fully Westernized country. But they are still a minority. Most of the Russians, including young people, because not all the young people are like this, are sort of fed with the West. They said, okay, it's complicated. I don't want to sound pro-Russian, okay? I'm neither pro-Russian nor pro-American, no pro-Chinese, no pro-nothing. The only stake I have is my origin, my native country, which is Italy. That's the only stake that I have. But and probably not even the country, to be honest, more the Italians, the people, rather than the country. But apart from that, yes, the overall zeitgeist, the overarching mood of the Russian society is that the West is no longer our destiny. We need to go toward the East. We need, in 20 years, Chinese will become mandatory in schools and things like that. Okay, let's go back to something military. So, something technical. M7, what is your opinion on the S-400 system? Has it changed from before the war to now after we have seen its performance? Honestly, I think it performed quite well, in the sense that this system and the other system that the Russians deploy have consistently managed to deny a strip at least 50 or even 100 kilometers of beyond the contact line to anything Ukrainian that was actually flying. So it was a big challenge, I have to be honest, but that's what they did. The fact that some of these have been destroyed by drones or by the HIMARS or at the beginning, or more recently by the attackers, um, yes, you have to expect some losses. You may not expect to you may not expect to for a system to be 100% effective. And considering that the Russians deploy a lot of these systems, you may expect some of them to be lost. The thing that quite surprised me was the pictures from the Ukrainian drone, in which we see the S-400 battery hit by the attackers, and the battery was trying to defend itself, and they didn't manage to do that. So I don't know how many missiles were actually used, but it could be that the attackers have some sort of terminal maneuvering capability that is not known, and because this is the only way the S-400 was the S-400 would have not shot them down. But either didn't see them, but in these cases is incompetence, because the radar should be perfectly capable of identifying those, or there is something that we don't know about the attackers, even the relatively old versions that the Ukrainians have. The other interesting thing is the fact that Ukrainians could film the all this happening, having a small drone loitering around, which means that the Panthers that should be with the S-400 were not there. And yeah, that's a problem. But as I said, it happened in a number of situations, in a number of cases. But overall, the Russian air defenses work quite well. For me, Ukraine's war reveals how, for these specific conflicts where the technological gap between the contenders is not that huge, industrial output is more important than technological level. So, technology is key in air combat. In air-to-air operations, there's very little that you can tactically do if your opponent is completely superior in all metrics, from a technological point of view. On the ground, if there is something that the Ukrainian war is actually teaching us, is that technological superiority is important, but up to a point. Have you seen all these Western weapons that were considered relatively modern, relatively effective, started being very effective, and then the Russians reacting, and then the effectiveness dropped dramatically. Well, not always dramatically, but their effectiveness was heavily reduced, and so on the ground, technological superiority is important, but up to a point. I probably would say that the key technological element of superiority that the Western weapons had was the fact that the vehicles tended to be way more survivable for the crew than the Russian ones. And yeah, so this is saving non-negligible quantity of losses to the Ukrainian. That was very important, and probably is a lesson that the Russians have learned. Consider T-14. That tank is built with crew survivability in mind. It's a lesson that they already knew, and they're probably thinking that this was a bit too early. Yeah, the modern F-16, please stop, it's just silly. We haven't seen them, and I was not yet. I don't think that they will be very effective, to be honest. And this I sort of agree with you. But I was speaking about the HIMARS, for example. At the beginning, they were extremely effective. And now, between electronic warfare and the capability of the short-range air defenses to intercept these missiles, yeah, they're way less effective. Same, it's the case of the Excalibur round, which sort of became as accurate as a ballistic round is is one of those cases. So, yeah, this was stuff that was supposed to be better than anything the Russians had. Turned out to be true just for a few weeks, a few months. Then the Russians reacted, and it wasn't. So technological superiority on the ground, on the land domain is important, but not that much. True, but it was still considered a modern weapon. It was still considered more effective than anything the Russians could put together. Your thoughts on remote control tanks? I saw T-72 with VR remote control today. So I'm not a massive tank expert. I've seen the remote control thing. I mean, the turtle tanks are normally guided using cameras, which sort of explains how they can be driven at all, can they move at all. But that's interesting. I mean, the T-14, again, I need to go back. The T-14, but also the American concept, or the German concept of the future tanks actually include virtual reality and this kind of complete isolation of the crew from the view outside. And in terms of remote control, I think things are not mature, yet. So we won't see too many remote control systems. Okay. Have you seen any evidence of further changes or refinements in Russian Air Force tactics since the start of the war? Ooh, yes. Definitely, yes. Not on the scale that is done on the West, but they're starting to do time on target operations. It's still 2, 4 aircraft, 6 aircraft, but not that many. They started operating combined patrols, hunter killers, with Su-30s and Su-35s. That's quite interesting. The way the helicopters have been used changed radically, completely. The Russians had a completely different idea of how to use the helicopters, and they simply couldn't, because the manpads created a very hostile environment. So that has completely changed. Can you make a video for kids and explain how stealth works and that it doesn't make a plane invisible or as small as a bee? Oh, well, I've did this this already, and many years ago. We can repeat that. Why don't Russians have dedicated jammer platforms? Even Chinese have developed that. It's well, that's a good question. To be honest, I don't know why they never did this. They developed the electronic warfare suites. I'm wondering if this is not a concept that is old, in the sense the F-35 has everything internal. There will never be, I believe, an electronic warfare version of the F-35 because everything is already inside. The Su-57 went in the same direction. No idea with the J-20, but I believe it is the same. So, yeah, probably, yeah, probably it's just sort of is an aging concept, probably. So it has gone from Russia has all these wonderful new weapons that turn out to be vaporware, and now they're relying on the same old, same old. Okay. What was the vaporware? Please name a system that has never been developed. That has not that they sort of claimed that it existed and it was never developed. The problem, this is this is the problem with the perception of from the mainstream media. If you go since they completely screw up the initial invasion, now the Russians are idiots. No, they weren't idiots before, they're not idiots now. They made a bad mistake, mostly of political origin. Doesn't mean that everything the Russians say is 100%, and then doesn't mean that everything they have is top notch. It isn't. But they are developing a lot of interesting stuff, which just ends up being different from what the Western does because they tend to be asymmetric. They generally try to be asymmetric. And so it is basically okay. I should probably stop this because this is the kind of perception based on this kind of superficial perception that puts the public opinions in a position of not being able of judging correctly the solutions. With the recent announcement of the Mirage 2000 for Ukraine, is there a possibility of the aircraft to perform actions inside Ukraine, starting from NATO airfields without land or refueling Ukraine? Well, in theory, yes. In practice, it's horribly dangerous because if this starts happening, this is going to be escalated. The Russians will hit those air bases, and the NATO will retaliate. And yeah, we have boots on the ground in Ukraine. It's a nice war between the NATO alliance and Russia, which is going to end up being nuclear. Cannot be won by each side. If the Russians, for some sort of twist of fortune, manage to get close to Warsaw, close to Berlin, they will nuclear. They will stop by nuclear weapons. If the NATO manage to invade Russia and get close to Moscow, nuclear weapons will start to rain on them. So it's not winnable. A war between two nuclear powers is not winnable in the sense that it used to be. You can still have a conventional conflict, but as soon as the pendulum sways on one side to another, you will hatch the nuclear weapons and everybody will be done. Now, I wanted to say, yeah, thank you to Super Chat. Yeah, this is one. Thank you very much for your donation. Can Su-57 supplement the loss of A-50s since it has a powerful radar and it is meant to get weapons fired from other platforms? Well, in principle, yes, could be partially a partial replacement, even though the radars are quite, the two radars are quite different. It could help. Problem is, I don't think we are going to see this, the Su-57 in this war doing anything really important. Even if they could, okay, so by this time could have tried to use stealth to hit some targets inside Ukraine, maybe an easy target, just to say if it is working, okay? Just to say how it works. They didn't. Some say because they fear to lose it, which could be. That's the same reason you want. That's the same reason you won't see an F-35 doing anything really dangerous in all those smaller conflict and proxy conflict around the world. That's one thing. But the other is the fact that the Russians don't want to show their cards. That's the top of their aerospace production. They don't want to get any NATO sensor even close to that aircraft. What they sent in Syria, where indeed some NATO assets were present, was just a few prototypes that are quite different from the point of view of stealth and electronic equipment from the production aircraft. So they didn't show too much. Also, the engine, the current engine is not the final engine. There's a number of things. So I don't think it will see the Su-57 doing anything in this war. Do you have any news about shut down Russian strategic assets in the south area of Rostov for both the asset type and the location of the strategic implications are important? I don't know what you're referring to, if you are still referring to the A-50s and the 222s or the radars. They're two very different situations. The aircraft shot down for me isn't clear at all. I don't think that the version given by the Ukrainian is credible. I know that some others said, yes, difficult but possible. I don't think it's possible. The if it is about the strategic radars, well, it's different. It's a different thing. I'm well aware of the recent news that the Russians really don't have a early warning for the launch of missiles from submarines. I still have. I'm not commenting on that because the judgment is still out. Believe that Postal discussed something which is quite old and no longer current. At least not in the terms he actually explained. Here is the vaporware. Su-57 being used for air superiority in quantity, but limited fleet being held with vaporware. Fine. Okay, so A is not vaporware because it does exist and it is in serial production, slow, but in serial production. B, I just explained why you won't see the Su-57 in this war like you won't see the F-35s. Okay. Okay. Okay, how long have we been here? That's quite a long time, to be honest. And I start being quite raucous and a bit hungry because I didn't eat anything before before the live stream. And so 275 people. That's fantastic. So thank you so much for first for all those who actually donated, to all those who actually donated. Thank you very much for your present, for having spent some time with me. As I said, I always feel that I'm really privileged to have uh, your attention and your view. And okay, there is a big video in the making, which I hope I will be able to publish this weekend. And there's a plenty of other stuff that is half done in the pipeline. But with my 9 to 5 job and let's say other commitments, is difficult to reach every nook and crannies. But yeah, trust me, we we will. There will be a lot of interesting stuff in the coming days. So thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.